Hello, dear students. Welcome to the second part of this lesson on Renaissance art. In today's lesson, we will learn about the High Renaissance and the Venetian Renaissance. We will also analyze some major artworks of this art movement. And finally, we will do a quick revision by seeing the key points of this art movement called Renaissance. The High Renaissance refers to a 30-year period exemplified by the groundbreaking, iconic works of art being made in Italy during what was considered as a thriving societal prime. The High Renaissance relocated to Rome, which became the cultural capital of the movement, under the generous patronage of successive popes. This period is considered as the highest peak of artistic achievement, in which Renaissance art reached an unsurpassed level of grandeur. A rejuvenation of classical art married with a deep investigation into the humanities spurred artists of unparalleled mastery, whose creations were informed by a keen knowledge of science, anatomy, and architecture, and remain today some of the most awe-inspiring works of excellence in the historical art canon. The main artists associated with the High Renaissance are Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo Buonarroti, Raffaello Sanzio, Fra Bartolomeo, Dosso Dossi, Andrea del Sarto, and Antonio Allegri Correggio. At that time, many artists started to use light and shadows in their works to add drama, perspective, and timing to their art. You can see an example here of the Calling of St. Matthews by Caravaggio. The path to realism in art reached its peak in the 16th century with Leonardo, Michelangelo, and Rafael, who achieved the classical ideals that artists had pursued since the Proto-Renaissance. The general character of this art was classical and intellectual in its concept, focusing on ideas relating to the structure, form, proportion, and the arrangement of figures within a formally balanced composition. Finally, the Venetian Renaissance gave rise to a different character of art, with a stronger emphasis on color, pattern, and atmosphere. During the 15th century, Venice was the most prosperous city in Italy. Due to its favorable location on the Adriatic Sea for trade with the vast Byzantine Empire to the east. It was a cosmopolitan port that traded in timber, exotic spices, luxuriant lace and silks, Islamic porcelain as well as metalwork, colorful minerals and dyes. The city was built on a group of small islands separated by canals whose shimmering reflections illuminate the area with a special quality of light. This peculiar blend of economic, cultural, and topographical conditions combined to inspire paintings with a more vibrant use of color. The main artists associated with the Venetian Renaissance are Giovanni Bellini, Giorgione, Tiziano, and Tintoretto. While artists from Florence and Rome were more concerned about using the rational elements of line, shape, and form to construct an ordered vision that reflected their classical mindset, Venetian artists more naturally engaged with essentially charged elements of color and light to create an atmospheric reflection of their world. The artist responsible for transforming painting in Venice was Giovanni Bellini. He experimented with the new technique of oil painting to create radiant images whose atmosphere was modeled with luminous color and delicate tone. His stunning landscape backgrounds rank among the greatest in the history of art. Here is an example with the Saint Francis in Ecstasy of Giovanni Bellini. Giorgione and Tiziano, both students of Bellini, took up their master's mantle, developing the atmospheric and expressive qualities of oil paint. When Bellini died, Tiziano went on to become the supreme master of the Venetian Renaissance, excelling in every genre with a style of spontaneous brushwork in his later paintings that unshackled painting technique for future generations of artists. The last master of the Venetian Renaissance was Tintoretto, also known as Jacopo Robusti. His wayless figures, angular perspectives, dramatic lighting, and vigorous brushwork create a uniquely personal vision of his subjects, which, although criticized in his own time for their unorthodox technique, are appreciated today for their individuality and freedom of expression. Let us now analyze a few famous artworks of the Renaissance. The Monalisa, also known as La Gioconda, is thought to be one of Leonardo da Vinci's favorite paintings. It remains the most famous artwork in the world. The artist carried the Mona Lisa with him until he died and was clearly aware of its significance. The subject is viewed from a frontal position and is seated on a balcony. Her face stands out against two distinct areas in the background, a civilized landscape and an imaginary one. Although the observer has a bird's eye view of this scenery, there is definite harmony between the figure and landscape. Mona Lisa is wearing very plain clothing, which is markedly different from other costumes painted at this time. She wears a very dark, simple dress with a pleated bodice with golden embroidery. The dress has a low neckline that exposes her chest. She is not wearing any jewelry, and a scarf hangs from her left shoulder. There is a veil hanging over her slightly messy hair, believed to be a mourning veil. Leonardo cleverly used light to define forms, model them, and create a feeling of depth. His sfumato lines disappear into the shadows and into the light, as he offers no contrasts or boundaries by faintly blending light and shade in a natural manner. The Mona Lisa is covered with a series of translucent glazes that add to the sense of depth and create a polished surface. This painting is the earliest Italian portrait to concentrate on the sitter in a half-length depiction. Its vast dimensions mean that it includes the arms and hands without them touching the frame. Painted to a realistic scale, the portrait has the fullness of a sculpture. The Monalisa was painted on a poplar wood panel that was of extremely high quality and cut from a single piece of wood. On the back, it appears that edging paper has been scraped off. An oak frame was used to strengthen the work in 1951, as it was slightly damaged. The Mona Lisa is a visual representation of the ideal of happiness, and the landscapes illustrated are very important. The middle distance, on level with the sitter's chest, is painted in warm colors. This is a humanized space, complete with a winding road and bridge. This landscape represents the shift between the space of the sitter and the far distance, where the scenery becomes an uninhabited area of rocks and water, which stretches to the horizon, which Leonardo has cleverly drawn at the level of the sitter's eyes. Viewing the Mona Lisa today, it appears rather drab, a mixture of dull yellow and brown tones. It seems that the work has been darkened by numerous coats of varnish that have yellowed with age. It is therefore likely that the painting was once more vibrant and colorful than it is now. In this three-quarters portrait, Albrecht Jure, dressed in a nobleman's coat with fur trim, faces forward with his right hand raised as if in a gesture of blessing. This, along with his intense and serious expression, evoke traditional images of Christ Pantocrator, as if the artist were a living icon. Using chiaroscuro, his image is shadowed, merging into the dark background, while light highlights the right side of his face and body. It is now your turn to analyze this amazing artwork of Rafael. Try to find out what the artwork is about. Have a look at the figures and at what they are doing. Which colors have been used by Rafael and why? Can you see perspective here? Do further research to find out about the techniques used. Here are some key points to help you remember what we have learned in this lesson. The Italian Renaissance was the rebirth of classical values in art that influenced artistic thought for the next 500 years. The key elements that formed the art of the Italian Renaissance were naturalism, classical humanism, perspective drawing, and the development of oil painting. The main painting techniques of Italian Renaissance art were fresco for large-scale murals and tempera for smaller panel paintings. Later on, we also saw the apparition of oil paints. The four main stages of the Italian Renaissance were the Proto-Renaissance, the Early Renaissance, the High Renaissance, and the Venetian Renaissance. The Proto-Renaissance is the name given to the period of transition in Italian art as Byzantine art began to decline and a more naturalistic style evolved. The Early Renaissance introduced perspective drawing and a greater naturalism to the drawing of the human figure. The High Renaissance achieved the classical ideals that artists had pursued since the Proto-Renaissance. And the Venetian Renaissance produced a more colorful, atmospheric style of painting that reflected the vibrant cultural character of the region. Here are some websites and internet sources that you may refer to. The Renaissance period is an important part of art history. I know you have enjoyed this lesson and that you have been inspired by all these amazing artworks. It will now be easier for you to analyze and talk about paintings and sculptures created during that time. I leave you with this inspiring quote from Leonardo da Vinci. Painting is poetry that is seen rather than felt, and poetry is painting that is felt rather than seen.